Hey there, my name's Rohan Bennett, and I'm a professor in information systems and also a senior geodetic advisor with Cadastre International, which is the international arm of the Dutch Land Registry. I'm also the chair of Commission 7 of the FIG, which focuses in on land management and cadastral issues, representing around about 100 member associations globally. But today I'd like to really focus in on the work with my colleagues in the Netherlands. And this presentation will take you through some of the data-driven approaches that Dutch Cadastre and the Netherlands more broadly has embarked upon over the last few decades when it comes to issues like spatial planning, registration of land and natural resources, response to climate change and disaster management. So I'll just get my slides up and we'll get into the content. So I'll first, for those who may not know much about the Netherlands, give an introduction to the Netherlands and the country context. Then we'll talk about digital government in the Netherlands. I'll focus specifically in on the dissemination and sharing of some key data sets or foundational data sets, which in the Netherlands is managed through the system of key registers. Then we'll go through some examples and focus a bit on the spatial planning domain. And I will say up front, I'm really sorry I could not be with you all this week, and particularly in this session on natural resources and land management issues. And I do wish you all well, and thank you very much to the organisers for assisting me in trying to get the visa issues sorted. And as I said, yeah, do wish you a great week at the GeoNow conference. So the Netherlands is a small country, a large percentage of it below sea level, based in northwestern Europe. You can see it's made up of 12 provinces, which themselves have 342 municipalities. It's around 41,000 kilometres squared with 18 million inhabitants, which hasn't changed so much over the last decade or so. The provinces are responsible for spatial planning, environmental and conservation issues, and focusing really on the regional economy. Those regions have a lot of historical value in terms of identity for the country. The municipalities, they're looking after social affairs, employment, welfare, education, and that detailed land management and zoning issues. The Cadastre and Land Registry function is actually a national responsibility, and that is where Cadastre comes in, the national mapping and cadastral agency and registration agency, which looks really after cadastre, registration, and topo maps. If you have a look at the density of the Netherlands, the majority of the country is over on the left-hand side of this map. That's what we call the Randstad. And you can see over in the east and in the north, population's more sparse. That's more the rural area. If there's any in the Netherlands, you'll find it over there. So what are some of the challenges in this context? Well, as you can imagine, being very close to the sea and, well, with a large proportion of the country at or below sea level, climate change and disaster response are quite big issues and focus areas. The Netherlands is also very agriculturally intensive, always has been. I don't know if you followed the news in recent years, but that's been a very politically controversial area where, you know, the use of nitrogen and the farming community has really been a contentious issue around the amounts of that when we start to talk about carbon reduction emissions. Energy transition, a challenge also. We all know Netherlands for the windmills, but in terms of solar power and renewables, it's an area where it's still growing and putting a lot of intensive effort into. The country itself is largely urbanized, and that urban densification and renewal really has been a continual story post-World War II, continues to this day with rebuilding of infrastructure. Housing is a massive challenge in the Netherlands, particularly in the western side of the country, providing enough housing for the young population that wishes to live over there in an adequate form, as those post-World War infrastructures that were built and the first real wave of apartment developments gives way to the next generation. So e-government in the Netherlands, we're talking spatial, it is a centralized um, um, top-down approach, if you like. So there is an overall overarching data strategy for the Netherlands on public data and e-government. And then that filters down to the geodata strategy under the Ministry of Housing and Spatial Planning. And that's where the data ownership starts to be defined amongst those key custodians of data sets. So whether they're national government agencies or the municipal or provincial level. And then at the actual functional executive arm, you've got agencies like Cadastre or the Geological Survey who are really maintaining those data sets, ensuring the dissemination of them and the quality levels are kept. There is something called GeoNovum, which is the NSDI Executive Committee, which really helps to coordinate that process and make sure all the stakeholders are continually meeting and on the same page when it comes to standards developments. And that's been something that's been in place for quite some time. The Netherlands itself has always been a consensus building approach to governance, and that in the context of NSDI is where GeoNovum comes in. Then you've got the users at the bottom there, who in some cases, when they're public agencies and even other mandated agencies, must use the data that's defined in this strategy. So this whole story around the key registers dates back to 2003, where the view was we need to, we've sort of had the first wave of digitalisation of government. And in that, as we know, different agencies, different groups went off and did different things. They had their own IT infrastructure. The concept of interoperability of data and technologies was really just starting to take hold, and there was a need and a push to realise that we should be creating one data set and using it many times, rather than the large costs of creating, of each agency, for example, having its own street data set. So the objectives were pretty pragmatic when the key registers were started. It was about government that needs to know what it shouldn't be asking for data. It should have its own data. It should be citizen and business oriented. It should be servicing business and the community so they can do the work of society. It should be a government that cannot be fooled in terms of misrepresentation or misinformation being provided by other stakeholders. It should be a government that knows what it's talking about, has its affairs in order. And this is where the idea of a single collection, multiple use came into play. And that manifested itself in the system of key registers. So this was defined around 12 principles. I won't go through them all here. You can look at the slides at your own leisure. But as you can see, the key points are that the data sets were mandated in law. So each key register was legally recognised with a legally recognised or mandated custodians, and that the public sector agencies would be required to use those data sets. And not only that, by law would have to report errors. There needed to be financing, and different registers are financed in different ways, but there is a financing arrangement defined for each. And then a lot of issues around liability, quality assurance, and so on. So these were the principles that were put in place, and then it was the job of GeoNovum and those other entities to start putting together the data sets. So 20 years later, this is how things look like. You can see around 12 different data sets that have been defined. And you can see the ones in green are up and operational. You can see the first data sets came online in 2008, with others such as buildings and income and vehicles coming later, and then more recently persons, and the base map delivered later, and subsurface information in there as well. And it's an ongoing story. The arrows show the linkages between those data sets, and you can also see that some of the data sets, a large portion of them actually have geometry linked to them. So the cadastre, topography, valuation, base map, subsurface information, building and addresses. And some of the data also are open data. So that means they're actually provided open and in free of cost for usage, or to serve it into whatever application you're working on. So they really are the backbone for shared use and connectivity, and a single point of truth within government. So when it comes to data, and when it comes to, what's the point of truth that government holds these registers are mandated to deliver that, even if what we might see on the ground is a little bit different. And if we see that, then it should be corrected in the data set. So sorry, I said 12. It's 10 key registers that are operational intensive, but as you can see, we've got some other ones coming online. And the spatial registrations, well connected and mature. The geospatial sector, and that's where Cadastre comes in, is a really strong front runner in pushing the key registers and brings a lot of the IP and know-how on to do that. So most of the geodata is open access, including the cadastral fabric. That's not all the owner names, it's the cadastral fabric. So it's not the actual registrations in terms of being fully open access. And there are some constraints around registration data in the Netherlands generally, but the aim is still in the Netherlands is to have ownership as much as possible open to all members of the public. Constant conversation driven through GeoNovum and the NSDI. And there is an increasing demand for cross-sectoral information. So the wicked problems that I mentioned in the slide earlier around infrastructure, around climate change response, typically are asking for multiple data sets and even data sets where there's combined attributes from those different layers. So Cadastre, we're a key player in all of that. So this is what it looks like, buildings and addresses, Cadastre, topography, and the large-scale base maps. So the large-scale base maps is almost in a process of continual updating in the Netherlands now, and those obviously can be layered, and these can all be fed via APIs into whatever web or mobile app you're wanting to create to do your business or service to the community. So obviously competitors there could be argued as Google, but in the case of the Netherlands, you'd say, well, if you want to be aligned with government and how government sees the world and to do services linked to government, you can be making use of these free data sets rather than using something like Google Engine. A lot of information available in relation to an individual parcel, which is the primary data set that Cadastre is responsible for. So you can see everything from the building footprint to the address. So the address isn't actually created by Cadastre, but it helps to serve that address of the property. Rights of way, the property size. You can see also the information about energy labels and sales prices can also be linked through, and you can get these property reports and log on to Cadastre and search for these. And this kind of is the information that a real estate organisation, so a prominent one is Funda.nl or Funda.nl, will come through and collect this information and serve it up as a service through the real estate sector. So serving it all out to the community is this open geodata portal known as PDOK. Again, I won't read through all the stats here, but as you can see, 22 billion hits per year. So that's not 22 billion people logging onto this portal and using the data. It's all the automated or APIs, linkages that are being served when you use your mapping app to do something within the Netherlands. You can see what was new in 2023 is that there's a new 3D basic viewer involved. So a push towards 3D is certainly on the cards. You can see also 99% of the data inside the PDOK or served up through the PDOK is Inspire compliant, which is the EU regulation around NSDIs. So what are some of the challenges? I'm just looking at my time here. Some of the challenges that are being confronted by the Netherlands in terms of data driven opportunities, but also perhaps challenges. Several just to point out here. So there is a shift towards, or the focus is shifting towards not so much the supply side, which has got itself sorted over the 20 years, but really now starting to find those use cases and users to move to a more demand-driven approach in terms of supply of data. There is increasing demand users from requirements from users around quality and currency of data, interoperability issues, wanting more metadata to improve their services. Also, a focus on sustainable governance and funding around these models. So the government-wide society business case is not equal to the individual organisational business case, if that makes sense. So that's sort of the focus, the strategic focus on Cadastre and Genovum at the moment. In terms of some specific challenges that are societal-wide, where geodata and the key registers are needed, there's a big energy transition push. Obviously, we had the gas crisis a few years ago. There's been an increasing drive towards use of solar panels and installation of solar panels, and that is a spatial issue. Where should they be located? How many do we have? And how do we incorporate that information for buyers and sellers in the land market, but also for other government agencies that would like to know how much collectively renewables are contributing overall to the energy equation in the Netherlands. Here's an example of how the land registry in Cadastre is being used to secure property rights, for example, in relation to solar panels. So one particular region, or the regions are seeking to achieve 50% of ownership of large-scale renewable energy production in the near future. And here's an example of a local energy initiative that generates its own renewable energy with solar panels, and those solar panels are collectively owned. So the situation there is on the left-hand side, many panels on the roof, and then there's a deed that outlines that they're collectively owned, and then that is also registered in the Cadastre. So that's done through the approach to superficies, but it's really the creation of a new right that gets registered down to the parcel on top of the roof. There's also, when we're moving to these renewables situation, the need for new transformer stations, and where should these be located? They can be big and bulky, and as I said, the Netherlands is a small country with quite compact cities and urban spaces. So again, the Cadastre information and the key registers help to provide information about where suitable locations are, and where they're not suitable, and where they are currently placed, and to ensure there's no conflicts by putting those in place. There also is increasing demand for larger scale solar plants, and again, questions about where are these located and where should they be located, where are the suitable areas. That's a story and a use case where the Netherlands data really comes into play. So you can do those analyses and analytics to determine if you're on track and where opportunities might lie to increase those solar farms. You can see in the Netherlands there, for example, they're often placed next to highways and railways, 44%. There is 90% of smaller farms that are actually in built-up areas, and 75% on freehold. So this all helps you make informed decision makings, but also for reporting. Another area where the Netherlands has faced increasing challenges is around climate change, in particular, not so much flooding from larger rainfalls, excessive downpours, that's challenging the stormwater drain system. So, and that also feeds into foundational damage around weak soil. You know, the soil needs to be waterlogged in the Netherlands, but only to a certain amount. So this excess downpour can really impact upon that. Again, here's another example of those cross-purpose or multi-sector players that need to be involved. So you've got insurance, financing agencies, utilities that would all like to be involved in the preparation, the response and the recovery aspects of this particular challenge. Another service provided by is the underground cables, and this service is again about having a single point of truth for where all the underground subsurface information is. So this kind of 3D data set has actually been in place in the Netherlands for quite a while. Now we're moving more into the 3D building areas. But obviously, when you hit a cable, that's a big cost for the private service utility provider. Don't want to do it. And so this service shows where all those cables are. There's about 1 million quests annually. So if you broke that down per day, you can see this service is used quite a lot. There's a lot of work going on in those urban areas, and this really shows you what's happening under the ground. So the policy on spatial data in the Netherlands is continually updated. It's reviewed, really looking at the landscape and to keep really the data-driven approach reliable and accurate and available in terms of the data that's available to the community, understanding the foundational data and ensuring that it's always at a quality that makes good decision-making possible within the country, and ensuring that it's always shareable. That's been a big focus also in the last 5-10 years, is to make sure the data that's there and being created actually has the use cases and the users to use it. And so just to finish off here, this kind of a schema of the rebuilding of the Netherlands. A lot of countries that are going through that continual reconstruction of their infrastructure. This is a visualization of that. And just to sort of show how that all fits together, you can see down the bottom is your data foundations, your supply of data. That's the key registers. They should be interoperable. They should have high quality and be connected. And that's what that schema of the key registers does. And then they need to have an ability to serve that out to the community, and that's where agreements and standards and service providers all come into play. And then that should really help you deliver on spatial planning, registration, valuation, development activities, and the processes around that. So that's where the processes, data and processes always go together. And hopefully that responds to our society and policy and governance goals. So I'll just finish up there, and I'll again thank you for the time and the opportunity to present in this session on natural resources and land management. Obviously, Netherlands is a different kind of country context. It's a small, compact country, very highly urbanized, but it does have a big agricultural sector, and it does have natural resources in terms of its waterways, estuaries, and so on. So combining all those demands a solid connected data foundation. The land administration itself is essential for effective land use planning and spatial planning purposes. And it relies not on a single agency, it relies on a combined information from various sources across multiple government agencies, and that demands collaboration, consensus, standards, and all those things that we know that the UN GGIM, IGIF, Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, demands. Our systems are pivotal in connecting various data worlds, and the land administration system itself is useful for the analysis, design, and creation phase of land use. I should say Netherlands also, like we are here this week, really likes to play an active role in sharing, but also learning from our global counterparts, in whatever region they may be in. So we are involved heavily in the UN GGIM in different expert groups. Historically, the Land Administration and Management Expert Group. We're also involved with the FIG through various commissions and have been for a long time. And we really recommend that to other organisations looking to continually innovate and ensure that their systems are meeting the demands of the communities that they work for. So with that, I'll thank you for your time. I'll stop the show, and I really hope you have a great final discussion session.